Now let's talk about some special considerations here with regard to carbs and weighing and measuring things. So both, a couple of these different things here have to do with health, and then some of them have to actually do with just measuring carbs in your MyFitnessPal. So special considerations: fiber versus sugar. Not all carbs are created equal. Fiber is technically not digested by your body. It's, makes its way to the large intestine and the colon, and it's fermented by your gut bacteria. So it provides a lot of health benefits for you, but it's not technically digested by your body in the same way as sugar would be. So, fiber is tremendously healthy, sugar not so much. So, in general, you want to make sure you're getting at least some fiber from your foods. If you're eating some non-starchy vegetables, you'll be getting some there. Starches tend to have a little bit less in the way of fiber. Fruit has some, but definitely want to get some of that. And then sugar, going to want to keep to a minimum. I'll say this right now, these targets that I have up here are a little bit difficult to attain, so don't let these be the end all and be all. But if you're curious about macro targets for fiber and sugar, if you can get something close to 45 grams a day of fiber, that, tends to be as close as we can get in a modern day context to what hunter-gatherers were eating in terms of fiber, and even that's, they were eating way more than us. And then sugar, specifically fructose, if you can keep it below 25 grams a day, that would be beneficial and helpful. That one of the ways that's easy to do that, right, is going to be something like a white potato or a white rice is going to be very, very low in sugar. It's going to have lots of carbs, of course, right, a lot of that glucose, a lot of that starch, but it's going to be very, very low in sugar. And vegetables are very low in sugar, whereas fruit is not. So trying to balance those two out from a health perspective can be beneficial. One of the reasons why we're so sick today is that our fiber intake is very, very low and our sugar intake is very, very high. So trying to balance those two out can be very beneficial. Another consideration to take into account when you are talking about carbs and balancing them out is going to be this idea of net carbs. So net carbs, again, goes back to this idea that when you intake fiber, your body is not, strictly speaking, digesting it the same way it would starches, glucose, fructose, sucrose, all those other things. It's really fermented by your gut bacteria. So the net carbs for an item would be the total carbs minus the fiber. So I'll give you an example just kind of off the top of my head from something I know that I eat on a fairly frequent basis: green beans. So green beans, technically there's something like 5 grams of carbs per serving, but there's about 2 to 3 grams of fiber. So the net carb load on that is going to be somewhere around, again, 2 to 3 grams. It's subtracting the fiber from that total carb load. So when calculating your carbs, this can be a nice way to potentially even get more in the way of carbohydrates if you'd like, as long as some of it's coming from fiber. Now, another important thing to keep in mind here is that this is not always equal to sugar on the package. So some people say, well, just look at the amount of sugar in the food and that will tell you the net carbs. That's not always equal. So it's really total carbs minus fiber, and even that's kind of an approximation, but it's a good place to start. Particularly if you're doing keto, this can be a way to kind of save your life because, something like raspberries, right, are a little bit more carby, but they also have a lot of fiber, so you could actually have some fruit here and again if you focused on net carbs. And then lastly, like we talked about last time with protein, raw versus cooked, you hear all sorts of opinions on this with regard to which is better with macros. Generally speaking, based on the research I've done and what I've found, weighing and measuring this stuff raw is probably going to be your best way to go for a couple reasons. Number one, assuming you're using fat on it or salt or other herbs and spices, that will contribute to the weight after cooking. If you've ever weighed and measured this stuff before cooking and then after cooking, you will notice a significant difference in the two, mostly due to the water evaporating from the vegetables and the starches. So generally speaking, raw is probably going to be the best way. The other consideration there is that the overwhelming majority of nutrition facts labels are based on raw macro amount. So that's how they get the calories, that's how they get the protein, the carbs, and the fat, is they actually do it with raw foods. And sometimes in MyFitnessPal you can find things like roasted Brussels sprouts or sauteed Brussels sprouts, but that's kind of someone's entry, and you're not getting the exact thing. So I would say for most practical purposes, weighing and measuring raw is going to be probably your best option. It's not going to make a huge difference, but it will make a difference, because there definitely is a difference pre-cooking and post-cooking with that stuff. All right, guys, so that is it for our Intro to Macros video talking about carbs. Hopefully now you've got a better sense about how to weigh and measure these things, how to make them, the building pieces of, a more macro-friendly approach to having particular meals, what kinds to get, and you're familiar with the special little considerations. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.